Hello, and welcome to another episode of I Own a Business, where we focus on helping practice owners build the practice of their dreams. I'm your host, Dr. Steve Vargo. At least I'm normally the host of the I Own a Business podcast, but on this one, I'm actually the guest. Recently, I was interviewed by Erich Mattei, who is president of Akrinos. Akrinos works with doctors who are starting or purchasing a practice, and you can find out more about them at akrinos.com. That's Akrinos. Definitely check them out. And just to give you some background on the interview and why Erich reached out to me, I had posted something on social media that triggered a discussion. And based on that, Erich reached out and asked me if I wanted to come on to his podcast to share some more of my thoughts on that. So here's what I posted. The best practices are not constantly trying to motivate people. They just have better systems in place and they manage the systems. That's much easier than constantly managing and motivating people. So would you agree or disagree with what I had posted? In this episode, we attempt to answer the question, which is more effective when it comes to managing employees, motivation or systems? Hope you enjoy.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Akrinos Access. I'm your host, Erich Mattei, joined today by Dr. Steve Vargo for a really insightful conversation that originated in a LinkedIn thread, as many great ideas do these days. It's all about creating motivational systems in your practice. And many of us have come to know Dr. Vargo, acclaimed writer, speaker, consultant. And Dr. Vargo is so excited for you to come on Akrinos Access to have this, explore this concept of motivational systems.
Hey, man, it is great to be here. My only concern in this interview is matching your energy level. So here's what I did, Erich. Before I got on, I had 8 cups of coffee and 2 Red Bulls just to try to keep up. So let's see how this
there
goes.
we go. Awesome, man. Well, let's go ahead and jump right into it. And let's start with maybe sharing with everyone, again, where this originated. It was kind of a thought-provoking LinkedIn post that you made. So why don't you give a little backstory to it?
So it was actually a Twitter post that then I copied it over to Instagram, and then somebody copied it and put it in a Facebook group. So I actually wrote it down because I my memory's not that good. I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but then I'll explain why I wrote it. So here it goes. This was started with a tweet. The best practices I've seen are not constantly trying to motivate people. They just have better systems in place and they manage the systems. That's much easier than constantly managing and motivating people. And Erich, when we talked before, I mentioned sometimes you create a lot of stuff too for social media, and sometimes you put a lot of effort into it, you edit it, you make it all pretty and you put it out there. And then sometimes you just throw something out into the world. This actually came, I just kind of threw this out into the world after somebody reached out with a question I get all the time is, how do I set up a bonus plan that's going to motivate people? And I think it goes way beyond that. We've got to look beyond just dangling some money in front of people and hoping it motivates, but how do we create better systems that are going to improve production in a practice?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because when we talk about systems, then we kind of look at the component parts, right? There's kind of this departmental side, but then the management side. So why don't we kind of expand on that and talk a little bit about organizational structure of the modern practice and the role of management and the role of departments as it pertains to creating these motivational systems?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of communication is involved. So you obviously work with startups, and the management model for a startup is usually it's the owner is everything, right? You're the manager, you're the doctor, you're the plumber, you're the electrician, you're everything. But as a practice begins to grow, by nature of the role, the doctor gets pulled more and more away from what's going on with the management duties. So there's some point where you do probably need to delegate somebody or hire somebody to take on more of the management responsibilities. And then as the business continues to grow, sometimes maybe you'll have departmental managers. I do think the owner doesn't have to be responsible for managing everything. I do think they should be the visionary, like any CEO of a business. Where are you trying to take this? What is the bigger vision? But making sure that you communicate that to, if you don't have a manager, making sure that you're communicating that to your team. or if you have a manager or managers, making sure that you're communicating that to the to your management, to your leadership team as well. And also with an open ear to listening to their ideas, but we can get into that as we move along.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit a word that's coming to be a word that I'm a very big fan of, and that is delegation. And but in the context of that, you also pointed out the importance of communication, but also the structure, right? Like you can't just blindly hand something off, delegate something out without having the structure around it. And that structure being expectation on deliverables, timeline, follow up, what have you. Basically, all those components we need so as to maintain accountability to, again, CEO, owner as visionary, then having the structure in place so that the team, the departments can really come together and get it done. So let's expand on that then, talking about getting things done. This is absolutely, when we look at the modern practice today, they come in all shapes and sizes with really unique specialties, different modes of practice. So let's talk a little bit about getting things done, SOPs, some of the day-to-day.
Yeah. So we're already talking about a more systematic approach, right? Than just saying if we grow a certain percentage, everybody gets a bonus. But there's really not clarity put around. I always ask people, what do you expect people to do differently? Because it's really within the actions, right? It's kind of like a fitness trainer just saying, hey, here's the goal, lose 20 pounds. A fitness trainer
Sure.
doesn't do that. A fitness trainer gives you a plan. It gives you an action plan. Here's the exercises you need to do. Here's the days you need to exercise. Here's the nutrition plan we need to stick to. And I think sometimes we fall short of that. I like to call it lazy leadership, which is basically just throwing out a bonus out there. And then if we hit it, everyone gets a reward, just hoping that people are going to respond to that. So I think setting clear expectations initially, not just if we hit this bonus, I'm just going to use a round number. If we grow 10%, right? What does everyone need to do differently? What behaviors need to change? What actions need to happen? And getting clear on that. You mentioned another key word too, which is accountability. And making sure that there's accountability mechanisms in place. So, and that's where the communication for me comes in. A lot of people dodge accountability because they're just not comfortable with confrontation, but it really doesn't have to be confrontational. If you're clear on what the expectations are, and then you just set meeting times with, it might be with a department, it might be with an individual, where they have to give sort of a status update back to you on here's where we're at. And in general, my favorite definition of accountability is getting people to perform in a way in which they know in advance they're going to have to answer for their performance at a later date. So when people understand that my manager, my leader, my boss is going to sit down, I'm going to have to report back to them on outcomes, it changes the dynamic of how I show up to work.
Absolutely. And to the key things that you mentioned there, one being talking about, incentive, like talking on the bonus front, right? And rather than just haphazardly tossing out a figure associated with some whatever generic goal, however it's arrived to. But I think it's important here, looking at the economics of the modern practice with so many dynamics going on in the business, that there needs to be some level of feasibility study, some level of strategic planning around that, right? And whether it's bonus or even these other big decisions that doctors will make, right? Well, when to add an associate to the practice. Hey, is now the time for me to, I've got 2 years left on my lease. Am I in a position to be able to go purchase a piece of real estate? Kind of, so some of the business fundamentals from like a feasibility study analysis, whether it's something seismic like cold starting a practice, which we do a lot of, or something even smaller in scale as setting up that bonus system. It needs to be sustainable for the economics of the practice through and through. Something else you mentioned that I think is really important to point out as well is the plan, right? Like having that strategic plan, going back to, you just toss out a 10%, X bonus on X growth goal without any sort of structure and plan for the team. And I think I'd love to maybe shift into talking a little bit about engaging the team and empowering the team, because I know you're very passionate about that. I know you've written and you speak a lot about that, Dr. Vargo. But so you have the strategic plan. How do we then empower people to go in implement the plan and kind of be sure that things are moving along in the system?
So anyone in a leadership position, if you want to be effective, it requires you to do something that I don't think necessarily comes natural to everyone in a leadership position. And it sounds counterintuitive, but it's to let go of control.
Sure.
Otherwise, what are you doing? You're essentially micromanaging people, but you're also saying that I'm always the one who knows what's right, and we're not. So the interesting thing about our team is they have insight to a lot of things that we might not be aware of, right? They're to a large degree, especially if you're the doctor and you spend 80 to 90% of your time in a dark room in the back, you're not aware of a lot of the things going on up front. So I want to hear, if the staff has ideas to make things better, to remove obstacles, to remove bottlenecks, to be more efficient, I think we need to be open to listening to their ideas and very receptive of those ideas. And I think it's the most important thing from a leadership standpoint is knowing what the outcome is, but you can define the outcome, but you don't necessarily have to define the process. If we're looking at the topic of this from a motivational standpoint, you're going to have a hard time motivating people when you're just constantly setting edicts that this is what I want, go do it, versus this is the desirable outcome. And let me hear everyone's ideas. How do you think we can get there? What problems have you noticed? What bottlenecks can we remove? What ideas do you have? And a willingness to implement other people's ideas, unless somebody comes up with something that's so off the wall that it's going to, there's like, oh, we absolutely can't do this. And also understanding that
Sure.
not everybody can have their way, right? But listening to everyone's ideas, I think, creates an environment where people will keep coming to you with ideas. Otherwise, you get into a situation where you'll create the type of environment that nobody wants. It's that environment where people are just standing around waiting to be told what to do. It's the exact opposite of motivation, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's clear that is definitely a distinguishing factor between organizations that thrive. And I mean, look, presumably we've got eye care professionals that are tuning into this, but really let's think about the practice just as any other business or any other organization. Uh, Really important to realize how it's leveraging the strengths of everyone and these unique, diverse perspectives. You pull all that together, and the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? That's where you really start to have that growth, that value of the enterprise. Let's now segue into, since we're talking about pulling the team in, right? You delegate, but you don't delegate from an island. You delegate being there amongst the team, but still looking to them to inform direction, give feedback, and the list can go on. So let's talk a little bit about the modern practice as a workplace. Kind of some of what you're seeing out there. I know, again, Dr. Vargo, you work with tons of practices, you speak all over and what have you. So what are you seeing these days, finger on the pulse, as far as like the modern practice as a workplace, both for staff, also for associate doctors?
Well, yeah, and it's become challenging in this environment because I know this isn't unique to eye care, but hiring right now is become a challenge, and retention of employees and even hiring associate ODs as well. So, I think there's probably never been a time more important than to really sharpen your leadership skills and to create that environment where people feel like they're making a contribution. I think generally people like to see their own ideas succeed. So it's one of the things that I'm so passionate about this is creating that environment and balancing. You can get, again, very clear on what it is that you want to build. It's your baby, it's your practice, but inviting people in and making them feel like they're part of the process. And it's gotten more challenging because what a lot of offices are dealing with, as is higher turnover, people want more money, and the complaint is that they're not, we're not getting the same caliber of employee that maybe we did years ago, but people still want more money. So it's become challenging, but I think it's ever important to continue to make sure that you're clear. For me, clarity is the starting point for leadership, and get really clear on what it is. If you're not clear on where you're going, then how can you expect others to be there? It's knowing where you want to go, setting clear expectations for others. We haven't really talked about this, but training and development is so many offices struggle with that. And then they'll say, well, I'm not getting the kind of productivity I want out of people, but there's really not a good training system in place. So training people, putting people in positions of strength, some people are just more suited than certain positions. And can we move them into a position where they're going to be stronger, and putting mechanisms of accountability in place, and for yourself as well. That's not just for others, but what you say that you're going to follow through on as far as your role as a leader, as a manager, as a doctor, making sure that you're following through with that and setting the example for others.
Yeah, I think leading by example is definitely another one of those huge things that clearly when it's done, wow. I mean, the amazing things tend to happen when one leads by example, right? And I think particularly in this context, I mean, let's think of the modern practice. For a lot of staff, presumably those coming in with no industry experience prior, there's doctor up here and then staff down here. So to be able to be that servant leader to your team, and also lead by example, saying what you're going to do and doing what you're going to say is so vital now. I'd like to get your thoughts also on, in the context of an employment environment where there's so much competition for people and there's a lot of turnover and what have you. Let's talk about compensation and benefits compared to structure and systems, because there's some debate out there. I know you'll see in some of the periodicals, debate out there, whether it's like, okay, do people want more money, or do they want kind of, other things in the workplace that isn't necessarily always money? But we'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. And just to follow up real quick on the leadership by example standpoint, the people are watching, and you have to be as a leader, they are watching you. You do define the culture. I had an office once, and it was the doctor. He said, I'm getting really aggravated with my staff because I've got a few that keep showing up late. And he's going on and on about this. And then he kind of dripped in at some point. Well, I know I get here, 5-10 minutes late, Okay. I'm like, well, hang on a second. If you want everybody else, if that's a priority for you and that's important to you, you got to be there on time or early. You can't be walking in 8 minutes late on a regular basis and then complain to the staff. Well, I know you're the owner, but still they're watching you to see what you're defining the culture. So as far as pay goes, it's a good question. And I don't know if there's a specific right or wrong answer. And it comes up a lot with associate ODs, right? Do we just pay them a flat rate? Do we build in an incentive bonus? I do think when you're hiring new people, they tend to look at that overall number. They tend to look at the salary. They tend to look at the hourly rate. I think you need to be competitive with that. I think bonuses can be good in some cases, not always. Sometimes they don't work. I've got my fair share of calls, as you probably have as well. Like, we put this bonus structure in place and it didn't change anything. And again, that's what we get when we don't have systems and we just dangle money there. And they'll complain that it didn't change anything, but now I'm just paying out more money. What happens if then it becomes an entitlement? And then if you take it away, you're in trouble for doing that. So that's why it's so important with bonuses to have systems in place. But yeah, I think offices are being somewhat forced to have good, whether it's an hourly rate or whether it's a salary, to remain competitive. And then in some cases, if you feel like the staff will respond to it, having maybe a bonus system in place as well.
Yeah. And something certainly not to be forgotten in all this that you've stressed a few times here, and that is leadership, right? So take the time to create the strategic plan and then lead your organization, lead your practice, lead your team to execute the plan. So let's talk a little bit about then, motivational systems. I mean, as we're kind of wrapping things up here, we started with tossing out this concept of motivational systems. So what do you think, Dr. Vargo? I mean, what do you think for listeners out there that are like, you know what? Yeah, I see so much potential in my practice. I'm ready to take a stand and like really take it to the next level. What do you think would be some keys to having these good motivational systems in place?
It all ties in, and I'll give you three things I would focus on. It ties in with creating systems, but also increasing the level of motivation in the office. One thing we don't, and I'll just again highlight something we've already talked about is autonomy, is empowering the people on your team. Are you really doing that? I think most of us know that, but are you really comfortable doing that? Letting go of that control and welcoming the ideas and letting them, a lot of good leaders, they let other people come up with ideas and they support their ideas. They're there to support them. Another one is, and we don't think about this as a lot, but are you training and developing your team? Not just training. I like to separate those two words because I think a lot of times when we look at training, we think of this sort of thing we do with an endpoint, right? And I understand
Right.
the need for that when you bring on, let's say, somebody who has no experience and you need them to be a doctor's tech, right? There's got to be some form of onboarding process to get their skills up to that level. But is there ongoing development? Are you continually pouring into that employee and making them better at their job? Now, how is that motivational? Well, science actually shows that when we feel a greater sense of mastery over what we do, we're going to be more motivated to do it. So the more we know, and I think you'll see that in your employees, the more you develop them, regardless of what their role is, the more excited you get to work with other people and kind of share what you know. And the third one I would say is just, are we explaining the why behind what we're doing? So instead of just talking at your staff that these are the responsibilities, these are the tasks that they need to do, um, are we explaining why we're doing this? How does it benefit the practice? How does it benefit the patient? How does it benefit that employee? Because a lot of the things that we're asking them to do, it all ties in. It creates a better work environment, which hopefully improves revenues for the practice, which allows you to hire more people and give raises and give bonuses, which is what we're talking about, and create a better work atmosphere. So, those are three things. Continue developing your employees, empower them. You don't micromanage, and be clear with the why behind why we're doing things the way we're doing them, so they understand the value that they're adding it and how it benefits them as well.
Yeah. Oh man, Dr. Vargo, what a really inspired conversation here. I really hope that all of our listeners out there have enjoyed this as much as I have, hanging out with Dr. Steve
I'm just going on
Vargo.
Red Bulls, man, and coffee. I'm going to crash here, and you got all my good stuff on caffeine and whatever they put in Red Bull. That's all you're getting right now.
That's funny. That's good. Awesome. Well, Dr. Steve Vargo, I guess before we go, how can folks get in touch with you? Let's see. We've got. I had a little glitch in my system here, but wanted to get your contact info up here on the screen. How can folks get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is good. I guess you just put a link up right there. Email, if you want to reach out, it's svargo at idoc.net. That's idoc.net. You can reach me there. And love to hear from you.
Excellent. And as far as your books, I can't believe we went through this entire episode and didn't comment. Why don't you just briefly share your content and where folks can get some of your stuff?
Yeah, and one of them is right out of a book I wrote called Eye on Leadership. So I really take a deeper dive if this sort of thing interests you. And then a few others on selling. I'm a big communication guy, and I've really tried to understand the art of that better, both from interacting with staff, but with patients as well. So I actually have a personal website. If you go there, you can see all the books. It's drstevevargo.com.
drstevevargo.com. Well, Dr. Steve Vargo, thank you so much for joining us here on Akrinos Access. Had a ton of fun. And folks, definitely the opportunity, the horizon is bright for private practice, and motivational systems absolutely can help you get to the next level. We have all of us here at Akrinos. Erich Mattei signing off.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Great seeing you, Eric.